Welcome to this edition of the 14 podcast. I am your host, Chris Lee. Joining me, a good buddy of mine in the sports media business, Gabe DeArmond from PowerMizzou.com. He covers Missouri for its Rivals.com site. Gabe, thanks for joining us today.
No problem, Chris. What's going on, man?
Well, what's going on is I try to pick out one of the most interesting games in the SEC heading into the weekend. So what does it say about the weekend of SEC football that we are talking about Missouri and Florida?
Yeah, not great. I do a pick show every Friday, and I went through and I'm like, let's pick a lot of Big Ten games this week because the SEC isn't giving me a whole lot. There's some intrigue in Missouri, Florida. I think probably from a national perspective, more certainly on Florida and like what's going to happen here. I talked to Nick De La Torre, who covers Florida for the rival site there, and I asked him if Mullen has to beat Missouri and Florida State to save his job, and he said he thinks so. He said he doesn't even think 1-1 gets it done. Like he's got to win both these games to come back next year. So it'll be interesting. I don't think a lot of tears would be shed around the conference amongst fans if Dan Mullen were to be relieved of his duties.
Yeah, some think that Dan Mullen is going to be safe because of the buyout, which, is really not a ton of money in this league anymore. But I just can't see the optics with your fan base of keeping a guy, if he finishes off, what would it be, 4-8, 5-7, I guess, if he loses the last two?
If he loses the last two, yeah. And you're talking about a team that's gone to 3 straight bowl games. And, I think the biggest problem for Florida is they're not up there in the top 10 in recruiting rankings where they kind of got used to being, whether it was under Urban or I assume Spurrier would have been there had they had those things back then, So they've lost 3 commitments this month to Georgia, so it's a combination of the SEC being Sabanized and now Florida specifically being whatever, Kirbyized, I guess you would say, like they're chasing this program that is their rival that like there's no real reason to believe they're going to catch them anytime soon.
Yeah, it is going to be a fascinating offseason for coaches. We'll get into this game in a minute, but since we're on the topic of coaching stability and hires, the LSU job is open. Mel Tucker at Michigan State expected to sign, a $95 million 10-year extension. Of course, as you said pre-podcast, he can sign that and still leave. Right. But what an offseason it is going to be in this league and really in college football too, with USC open, with Miami now open. It is going to be very interesting.
Did Miami come open today?
Oh, I guess not. But, the thought is that it might. But, yeah. So
and the most interesting part of the coaching carousel to me is not always what jobs are open the first time around, but it's what other jobs that causes to be open. Could Penn State be open? Yeah. Could Oregon be open if Miami hires Mario Cristobal? Could Baylor might now come open at some point? Cincinnati could come open at some point. It's my favorite part of the college football season every year, especially the years where I don't have to cover it. The one that it's always a better offseason if Tennessee has a coaching search, but I think LSU might end up doing its best impression because, you heard all this Jimbo Fisher stuff, and he basically came out and as strongly as you can said no. Then there was, they're going to offer a blank check to Lincoln Riley, and there was never any reason to that's not really a better job, I don't think. It's just a different job. So I think they're going to toss all these names out there, and then they're going to end up with somebody who's probably a good coach, like a Bill O'Brien or a Mark Stoops or something like that. But everybody's probably going to be disappointed because they think we're LSU, and we were talking about, this 24-karat gold, and now we've got this nice sterling silver thing.
If you're Scott Woodward, you're sitting there going, man, I wish we had not invited Oklahoma into this league for the purpose of my coaching search.
Yeah, but even if I'll be honest, Chris, if you're Lincoln Riley, why do you take that job? If you're at Oklahoma, even if Oklahoma's still in the Big 12, Oklahoma's won the Big 12 like 7 years in a row. They're in the playoff all the time. Bob Stoops won a national title there. They're a great program. Going to LSU, you're literally in the same division as Nick Saban. It's really hard, and I think coaches are getting smarter You remember when Brad Stevens and Shaka Smart were the hot names in college basketball, right? And Shaka jumped and probably shouldn't have, and Brad Stevens never did. He turned down these other places until he got an NBA job. But I think coaches maybe are finally starting to figure out making $8 million at a place where they're going to fire you if you go 9-3 is not really better than making $4 million at a place I can make $4 million every year for the rest of my life. I mean, some of these coaches should really, like, take Mark Stoops. Okay, if he gets the LSU job and he takes it, or offer, and he takes it, nobody would call him dumb, right?
Right.
But Mark Stoops is never getting fired at Kentucky. He can sit there and go 7-5 for eternity and make whatever amount of money he's making, and they will end up building statues of him.
Yeah, and they'll get 6-7 wins about every year because they play. It's like they just pick the 3 worst teams in the FBS, and then an FCS team, and there you go. Which, hey, nothing wrong with that if you're Kentucky, but you're right. I mean, he's making a ton of money. He can win. He can even get to a New Year's Bowl every now and then. So, I mean, and here's the other thing, too. People forget these are guys with wives, with school-age kids, all those things. Every time you do that, you're uprooting someone. I think happiness at where you are is very underrated because you can always make more money. Well, maybe not always, but you can't go back and do happiness again, right?
Right, and I understand you want to chase the brass ring, right? And everybody wants to be the guy at the big school where he can win national titles and all that. But again, you are talking, even if you are a group of 5 coach, we're talking life-changing money here. You know, and I've always laughed when we've talked about coaching, like these guys make $1.5 million, $2 million, $5 million, whatever they make. They all get courtesy cars. All their clothes are university, like, you know, team athletic department clothes. They all get country club memberships. Legitimately, they make all this money and I don't even know what they spend it on. Like They probably don't pay for meals in these towns either.
No, I'm with you. It's the pressure that it comes with. Boy, that's another thing. But I have one wish out of all this, okay? And you see if you agree with me. Whatever happens, I just want Lane Kiffin to stay in the SEC.
Yeah, it's good. He'll be an interesting one to follow because I think he's a great fit at Ole Miss. Like, he's personality-wise, and he's clearly brought great publicity to that program. And I think that is a place where they'll probably go 10-2 this year, right? Maybe 9-3, but if they lose the Egg Bowl. But if you go 9-3 every year at the University of Mississippi, you're never going to get fired. Like, you're in a great spot. You know, you're bringing great publicity. I mean, Ole Miss, eventually, don't get me wrong, 7 years down the road, there will be Ole Miss fans that go, well, 9-3 is cool, but where's 11-1? But overall, you go 9-3 at Ole Miss, you're probably never getting fired. So it'd be interesting. I mean, you know, I've heard Miami might want him, even though I think they're looking at Cristobal first. And I don't want to act like I have great sources on all this stuff. Like, I'm legitimately reading the national people. And, you know, this is just what you can piece together based off everything. But, yeah, I like Lane. He's done everything that he was hired to do in Oxford, and he's done it in like 1.5 years.
Do you leave for Miami if you're Lane Kiffin? Because it's all the stuff you said, plus Miami, from what I hear, I don't think the president really values sports. And when you're in that's tough. That can make your job a lot harder. I know we all think of Miami because we grew up when it was the U, but to me, that's not close to the same job anymore.
Miami hasn't been Miami in close to 20 years now. And if you look back, Chris, before about 1985 or a little before that, whenever Schnellenberger got there, they weren't Miami before that either. I mean, Miami and Florida State, honestly, have only been elite football programs for like a 25-year stretch. Now, they were unbelievable in that 25-year stretch. But, you know, everybody says, but it's closer to talent and all that. And, hey, theoretically at Miami or Florida State, you ought to be able to run the ACC. You would think, but here's another thing that I think changes all these guys' thinking. In a 12-team playoff, you don't have to be at one of these 6 schools to get in, right? Lane Kiffin is looking at this 12-team playoff thing and going, hey, if we had that this year, we'd be in. So I can do this here. I can do this at Missouri. I can do this at Cincinnati, at Memphis, at Cal, whatever, pick the school that doesn't ever get there. You can't do a 4-team playoff at any of those places, but you can do a 12-team playoff at all of them.
It seems like we are going to get a 12. I was starting to doubt that for a while because what you were hearing, and you probably heard it too, is that the other leagues, in order to spite the SEC, were going to limit the playoff and only 2 teams from each conference, which you know good and well where that was targeted. But I do hope, and Nick Saban has got some good points against it, right? But I think a 12-team playoff, to me, that's more interesting because you can drop a game. I'll give you an example. Let's just hypothetically say Texas A&M, after those 2 losses, runs the table. That's a talented team that had some quarterback issues and some stuff to sort through. Now, maybe I'm kidding myself, Gabe, because a lot of times it's, 4 teams get in and then one just waylays everybody anyway. So maybe it doesn't matter. But to me, it makes the regular season more interesting.
Well, and to me, it's not about is the 11 seed a real threat to win it. I mean, probably not, right? But it's about how many fan bases do you want to stay engaged in your sport as long as possible, right? How many fan bases right now really care about the college football season and are really playing important games? Like 8?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Maybe.
So if you're talking about a 12-team playoff, there's probably 20 fan bases that go into Thanksgiving going, this is the biggest game our program's ever played. That's good. I mean, look at the NFL, right? If we're talking about a 14 playoff, who's paying attention? Like, I'm not sure as a Chiefs fan, I'm paying attention.
Yeah.
But now, like literally in the AFC, there's only like 2 teams that don't still have hopes. Hey, I can win this thing. And that's what it's all about as a fan. You want hope. And college football, as currently constructed, gives you no hope whatsoever. It's a great sport if you want to go back to your campus and your alma mater and have some drinks and go to a tailgate and see the pomp and circumstance and all that. But if your goal is, I want to see my team play for something meaningful, it's by far the worst sport there is. I mean, because it's just absolutely impossible to do.
Well, let's say Wake Forest gets in the playoff this year. Wake Forest, if it's 12 teams, Wake Forest is not going to win it, but what you have is a banner that you can hang somewhere, like an NCAA tournament banner in basketball. And to me, I'm with you, that means a lot because it's not just about who's going to win it, it's about that too.
Yeah, it's about having been there. And again, once you're there, like everybody points to the blowouts that happened in the playoff, but I don't know who the number 12 team would be right now if we did this, but it's somebody like around Texas A&M, right?
Yeah.
Are you telling me that it's impossible that Texas A&M could beat Georgia in a playoff game?
Yeah, well, we've already seen close to it.
Right. So I can't imagine one logical argument to not do it.
Plus, it's printing money.
Yes. You literally can call up every TV network and say, this is what you will pay for it.
Yeah.
And they'll do.
Sure. All right, let's talk Missouri. Where is the fan base with Eli Drinkwitz and the state of the program at the moment?
I mean, overall, still pretty happy. I wouldn't say quite in that honeymoon phase anymore, but not to the point where anybody's impatient, right? And the next 2 weeks can determine a lot. I mean, if he manages to beat Florida and Arkansas, which I don't believe is likely, but if he did, everybody would say, whoa, he really rescued this thing and did a heck of a job. And, we're going into year 3 with back-to-back top 20 recruiting classes, which has never happened here and all this stuff. But even if he wins one, you're going, okay, it's 500 through 2 years, but he's done that largely with the 13th most talented roster in the SEC, and now he's bringing these guys in. I mean, what they like about him is almost all hope and potential and very little of what we've seen on the football field. And so next year is the first year we have to see some of that start to translate. And then 2023, I think, is the year that you need to see a step that's meaningful. And I'm not saying they got to win 10 games, but you've got to see something that tells me, okay, all this stuff he's talking about, there's a chance it's going to come true. You got to see that in the next 2 years.
Gabe, I got to see Tyler Badie up close and personal in Nashville a few weeks ago where he dropped about 300 yards from scrimmage on Vanderbilt, which he's now had 4 200-yard rushing games. I'm not going to argue that he's the best player in the league because you got Matt Corral and Bryce Young among other people, but that's pretty special. How valuable is he to his team this year? And frankly, I don't know with Matt Corral being the possible exception, he may be as valuable to his team as anybody in the league.
That's the word. I mean, I tweeted after last week's win over South Carolina, in which he had 200 and some odd yards rushing. He had another 50 receiving. I said, I'm sure there are better football players in America than Tyler Badie, but I can't believe there's a more valuable one. I mean, you take him off this team, I think there's a good chance Missouri's 2-8. They would have beaten Southeast Missouri, and they might have beaten North Texas or Vanderbilt. They don't beat Vanderbilt without him. I mean, they just don't. You saw that game. So SEMO and maybe North Texas are their wins if he's not on this team. I haven't run these numbers in a minute, but last time I did, he had touched the ball on 56% of Missouri's offensive plays this season. And, he's not a big guy. I mean, literally the storyline coming into this season was, how is 5'8", 195-pound Tyler Badie going to handle being an every down back in the SEC? I don't think he can do it. I'm worried, blah, blah, blah. And even the coaches said at the beginning of this year, Larry Roundtree last year averaged 22 carries a game. Or 22 touches a game. I went back and looked. It was the most touches per game any Missouri back had averaged since 1998 when I was a senior in college. Ooh. And the coaches came into this season saying, obviously it's going to be divided up more. A lot of those carries are going to go to Badie, but they were flat out saying Badie will not carry the ball 22 times a game. And they're right. He's averaging like 26 touches a game now, So, I mean, not only is he, I think he's 300 yards, 300 and change away from Missouri's single season rushing record. He's also their leading receiver with 50 catches this year. He's the only guy ever with 1,000 rushing and 1,000 receiving in a career at Missouri. What he's done is pretty incredible. I saw actually you put out, SEC Offensive Player of the Year rankings earlier this week, and I was honestly surprised to see Badie at 4. I think he's no worse than 2 in that discussion, but Missouri's 5-5, and I get what part of that is too.
Well, and why I docked him a little bit is who they've come against, right? He is cleaning, and no knocking him, but he is cleaning up against the bottom feeding portion of the schedule. It's kind of hard for a guy at Missouri, like when Bryce Young and Matt Corral are winning games against top 10 teams and showing out. That's hard to, but also he's got less supporting cast, so you got a point there.
It's the difference between a quarterback and a running back, right? I mean, the quarterback can single-handedly do things that a running back simply can't do. I mean, if there's not a hole, unless you're Barry Sanders, it doesn't fix things. But the other, and I had thought that a couple weeks ago too. I'd even brought that point up on our message board, and then he did it against South Carolina and Vandy. And I'm not saying those are great SEC teams, but they are SEC teams, and all you can do is compare him to the other guys in the league. I mean, maybe a lot of his yards are against bad teams, but everybody in the SEC has played bad teams, and nobody else has that many yards. Yeah,
you have a valid point. He's kind of hard to know what to do with because it's been such an odd season, just the volume and the schedule and all that we've been through. But does this season alone get him drafted?
Oh, I think he'll get drafted. I mean, he is a prototypical NFL, like, you can do everything in this league back, right? I mean, is an NFL team going to bring him in and hand him the ball 20 times? No, but I mean, he's what people told me Clyde Edwards-Helaire was going to be, right? We can throw him the ball out of the backfield 7 times. I mean, you put him in an Andy Reid or a Kyle Shanahan offense or something like that. I mean, he could catch 50 passes in an NFL season easily. He can return kicks. He can run the ball enough. I mean, he's a fast kid. I think he's like a 3rd or a 4th round pick.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. He seems like he's a good kid too.
Yeah, I don't know. We never talk to him. So, I mean, we get him after games now and then, but like he doesn't do media day interviews this year. I'm not saying he's a bad kid. He seems like a good kid. It's just that's what college football is anymore. You don't talk to anybody. Yeah,
this is true. On the other side of the ball, the defense, my goodness, that run defense has just been hideous, although it's gotten a little better lately. Yeah. What's going on over there?
Well, it's gotten a lot better lately now. There was only one direction for it to go. Georgia ran for 168 yards, and like that actually is a pretty good effort for Missouri against Georgia. Right now, I thought Missouri got a few too many bouquets thrown their way for getting beat 43-6. I mean, yeah, they tried. That's the bare minimum, But then they looked good. They held South Carolina to like 15 yards rushing. A week after South Carolina put up 200 on Florida, And maybe that says more about Florida than it does about Missouri. But we look for all these things. We spent all year on our site debating, is it the scheme? Is it the talent? Can they not learn this? Is the coaching no good? Is it this? Is it that? You know what football is a lot of times? All right, I'm going to line up, and that guy across from me, I got to do better than him on this play. And for 8 weeks, Missouri almost never did that. And for the last 2 weeks, they've actually done that. The defensive line has looked pretty good. The linebackers have been in the right spot. So we get so tired of hearing it's execution, right? Like, I hate that answer. But the truth is, that's almost always actually the right answer. I mean, people say play calling. Well, no, they don't call plays that are designed not to work. They call plays that, if they are executed correctly, will work. If they are not executed correctly, sometimes they don't. So I think Missouri's just, honestly, they've just played better. Steve Wilkes told us this week he hadn't changed anything. Guys are just playing better.
This is the stage of the show where I normally go through matchups and where can they beat Florida, where can they get beat, what's the problem. Frankly, I almost throw all that out the window because to me does Florida have any interest in playing? And the things you talked about indicate to me that Missouri still does, and to me that's more important than anything.
Right. And I don't, this sounds insulting to Missouri's program. I don't mean it to be, but it's a fact. The Duke's Mayo Bowl can be construed as meaning something to Missouri, where it's at in its program. It cannot be construed to meaning anything for Florida. I mean, every player who has a future would opt out of the Duke's Mayo Bowl for the Florida Gators, right? So, yeah, I've said on our site, if Florida comes in and cares and plays well, Missouri's not winning this game. But if they come in and they don't much care, like they haven't much appeared to care the last couple weeks, Missouri's absolutely good enough to beat them. I mean, Missouri just beat a team that beat them by 24 points 2 weeks ago. So, and if you can give up 52 to Samford, like, there ain't no guarantees on that schedule.
Well, Gabe, okay, you've seen my setup at home. I have 2 large TVs I watch, and I'm usually watching a phone or a laptop, and I'm trying to watch as much of 3 SEC games at once, plus my nephew when he's playing, which he's hurt and he's not playing anymore. But in any case, I'm watching a lot of football, and you got to make choices. And so 2 weeks in a row, I've not even bothered with Florida. I've not even bothered to check the score until well into the game. And then 2 weeks ago, a buddy of mine sends me a text who's a South Carolina fan. And he's like, hey, look at us. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I look up, they're down 31-10 at half. I'm thinking, surely this is not going to happen 2 weeks in a row. Right. And you look up and it's halftime and it's 42-all with Sanford. Yeah. So I don't know what else to expect at this point, given that.
Yeah, so here was my college football Saturday last week, right? I mean, there were some good games, right? You start the day thinking, hey, I'll watch this early, then I'll cover the game I got to cover. Then as I'm working, I'll probably watch this one. So my early window got blown up because, like you said, I'm seeing 28-14 Samford or whatever. I'm like, oh, well, I got to turn this on. And it just kept being pretty good and pretty competitive until about the time I had to do pregame for Mizzou, South Carolina. Went and did that. Did all my stuff and had some plan to watch some night game. I don't know what it was. And all of a sudden it's like, hold on, Kansas beating Texas 35-14? Watched the last 2 quarters and overtime of that game. I legitimately spent 4 hours of my Saturday watching Samford, Florida, and Kansas, Texas. Like, that's nobody's plan, right? But that's how it went.
It's that kind of year. Speaking of which, I think I know, but what was Missouri's reaction or the fans' reaction to the Texas is joining the league news?
The fans' reaction was, please God, no, we'll take Oklahoma, but please don't let those greedy idiots back in the same conference that we're in, right? I mean, like, there were legitimately I would say Missouri fans were split 50-50 on whether they were happy Kansas beat Texas or not. And if you know what Missouri, Kansas is, that says something, right? That's how much they dislike Texas. There's one saving grace here. I think the SEC is the one entity that's strong enough to not let Texas ruin it. Yeah. Because Texas has literally ruined everything it's ever been a part of. Like, that's not an exaggeration. They destroyed the Southwest Conference. They destroyed the Big 12. But I think at this table, they will simply have a voice. And it might even for a while be a lesser voice than a lot of other places. You know, I think the SEC is the one place that might go, nah, Texas, that's cool, but we got Mizzou and Mississippi State over here. We'd rather talk to them. We've known them longer. You know, so we'll see how it goes. But Texas just, it's never really swung this. I was having this conversation with somebody last week. If you take Texas and Texas A&M and what those programs think they are and purport to be, and then you look at what they've actually done, like, do you know in the last 60 years, or in the last 50 years, how many national titles Texas and Texas A&M have combined to win?
It's probably 1 or 0.
It's 1. Yeah.
And Young. I think that was a long – oh, that's right, Vince Young. Yeah. I thought maybe Texas got one in the 60s, but –
it maybe it might have been like 1968, which is now more than 50 years ago, right? So, yeah, I mean, and Texas just – look, if Texas isn't humbled by now, it's never going to be humbled, right?
Okay, you're probably the best person to answer this. Because you've been in the probably you don't even know what the question is, but where are they going to go on the most disliked team in the SEC list from, say, within a year or two of being in the league?
Like overall, just from a league-wide perspective?
Like, okay, first I'll clear this up. Like, if you're an Alabama fan, you were always going to hate Auburn more than anybody. Right. But that aside, where is Texas going to be on everybody's list of every fan base? And, you know, because sometimes, like, SEC fans, you may have a second or third team you root for or you don't hate. But Texas, I just don't sense that people feel that way about, oh, we're going to be rooting for Texas as soon as they're in this thing.
So let's establish what's the pecking order now, because I don't know if the most hated team in the league is Alabama just because they're so good, or – like, if you ask everybody which fan base they hate the most, almost every fan base says Tennessee.
Yeah, I think – see, to me, you have to take winning out of it, because winning – well, I say it's cyclical. Other than – and even Alabama had its down points in the 2000s, the 90s, right. Even the – I mean, so – but, I mean, you got about 5 or 6 programs that you can say – 20 years from now, they're going to be winning. It's Alabama, Oklahoma. I mean, I say that you would have put USC on that list not long ago, but right. take the winning part out of it. Everybody wants to see Alabama brought down a peg just because they're Alabama, but take that part out of it.
Then I think Texas, without question, will be the most hated team in this league. They've been the most hated team in every league they've ever been in. I mean, A&M hates them from birth, right?
Yeah.
Oklahoma hates them from birth. Missouri hates them based on history. Arkansas hates them based on history. I mean, Arkansas and Missouri both left leagues directly because of Texas. You know, that's why Arkansas left the Southwest Conference. It's why Missouri left the Big 12. And so, yeah, right there, you've got 4 teams that put you at the top of the list of this is the team I hate most in the league. And I think it'll be interesting to see, you know, what the alignment is and how they do it. I think it's pretty simple. You just go 8-team divisions, move Auburn and Alabama to the east and put Missouri in the west, and suddenly the SEC makes geographic sense and you move along. But I have no idea what they're going to do.
Yeah, see, I'm not close enough to it. I've never covered a team in the league where Texas is in like you. But I remember when Nebraska, my wife is a Nebraska grad, when they left the Big 12 for the Big 10, I was like, I hate that, because you're seeing all these traditional rivalries. Like, you used to always watch Nebraska or Oklahoma unless both teams were awful, and then you watched it anyway, because what else are you going to watch on that Friday after Thanksgiving? But and one of her first reactions was something along the lines of, yeah, we're glad to be out of Texas's way or whatever. I never understood all the reasons that people feel that strongly about it.
Okay, so let me give your listeners some perspective here. When Missouri was going through conference realignment, there was this feeling in the Big 12 that Missouri started all this, right? Because they kind of looked at the Big Ten, and Big Ten took Nebraska, whatever. Missouri took a lot of blame for it, when the truth was all Missouri was doing was looking out for itself and making sure it didn't get left, while Texas and Oklahoma were over talking to the Pac-12. So at one point, DeLoss Dodds, who was the athletic director at the University of Texas, was asked about Missouri, and I may miss a word or two, but this is more or less verbatim what he said. Missouri, our bad years are better than, he said, take a school like Missouri. Our bad years are better than their good years, blah, blah, blah. And DeLoss Dodds also said, we didn't start this, but we will finish it, right? That's like the movie bully line, right? And so 5 years into the SEC, I did a story with Gary Pinkel and Mike Alden and all the people at Missouri that had something to do with that move. And I reminded Mike Alden of that quote from DeLoss Dodds about Texas's best years being better than Missouri's, or worst years being better than Missouri's best years. And he said, and Mike had retired by this point, so he was honest and said whatever he wanted to say because there was no repercussions. He said, you know who says things like that? Arrogant people at arrogant institutions. And that's exactly what we dealt with in the Big 12. I mean, that's dealing with Texas. That's why people hate them.
Well, and the best thing about that is Missouri goes and wins the East twice right away.
I mean, since Missouri joined the SEC, they are like, I think, and Missouri hasn't been particularly good at football for about 7 years now, right? Since joining the SEC, they're approximately 4 games worse than Texas cumulative in that amount of time.
Wow.
In a tougher conference than Texas has played in. I mean, Texas has lost to Kansas twice.
That's almost unfathomable.
Yeah.
So Missouri hates Kansas, but I think their fans were happy about that one, weren't they?
Yes. Now, when the two teams would play in basketball, certainly Missouri would want Texas to win that game. And a lot of Missouri fans probably mostly Missouri fans were rooting for like a sinkhole or a comet or something like that. But should anyone have had to win? I mean, I don't know. I watched that game and I was rooting for Kansas. Like, I would have been disappointed had Texas come back and won that game.
That's a great line. Let's talk basketball. I watched a little bit of Missouri. Speaking of, well, I shouldn't say it.
I see where you're going, though.
Yeah. I turn on the TV and I'm just astonished. And I guess it's Central Michigan and Northern Illinois last night. That used to be a phenomenal atmosphere for basketball, and it's just is it like that? Is it gone downhill that much, or is that just hey, it's mid-November, we don't care right now?
No, for the most part, that's what it's been like for about 5 years now. It's just the atmosphere hasn't been there. Now, the season opener, actually, the student section was like 100% full for the first time in years, and it was kind of cool to be there with the kids caring and all that. And then Game 2, they lost to UMKC by 14 points, and you want to kill enthusiasm? There you go. Like, you can't tell anybody they should come if that's what you do. That's the product you put out. You don't get to ask people to show up, you know? And Missouri has been, like, their good years have been, like, kind of semi-relevant in basketball for about the last 8 seasons. You know, they have not won an NCAA tournament game. We're going on 11 years since Missouri won an NCAA tournament game. Mike Anderson was the coach here. The last time Missouri won one, I think they beat Clemson. And so it's just there's not much there. There's not a lot of talent on the roster. Missouri I think it would be an upset if Missouri finished better than 12th in the SEC this year. And there's not the recruiting since the Michael Porter Jr. class has been really bad. I mean, I ran it down the other day. There have been 5 guys in 3 years that legitimately the day they got the commitment, the general reaction, including my reaction, was, I don't get it. Am I missing something here? That's 5 guys in 3 years. I mean, that's a 30-year roster, you know, most of whom aren't even here anymore. But so, yeah, there's just not much. I mean, Missouri fans so I covered the 3rd game of the season last night, and I started a game thread on our message board, right? The first reply in the game thread was, F that. Like, I'm not watching this, you know? That's where they're at. And, like, it's hard to blame them. I mean, Missouri's been They went to the tournament last year, and there was this little blip, but overall, it's been hard to watch.
Cuonzo Martin'z got how many years left on his deal?
Oh, this is a thing. You'll enjoy it. Now, you asked that truly not knowing his contract.
I did. Is this the perpetual Kevin Stalling / Derek Mason rollover that I've covered a few times?
Well, there's currently a 5-page thread on our message board about it because I posted it after they lost to UMKC. I just said, here's the contract because I know you're going to ask, right? So the program was so bad when he took over for Kim Anderson that, like, I always compare it to, I grew up a Kansas City Royals fan, and years ago, they signed Gil Mesh to a 5-year, $55 million free agent contract. And everybody's like, what are you doing? And, like, Kansas City just flat out said, well, everybody else was offering him 4 for, like, 36, but we knew we had to give him an extra year and we had to pay him more to get him to come here. Like, we just knew. And so that was where Missouri was. Like, we're going to have to do some things to get somebody to take over what Kim Anderson left here because it is awful. And so Cuonzo's contract originally said that he could not be fired until May 1st of 2020, which would have been the end of his 3rd season. But when you're talking May 1st, basically you're guaranteeing another year, right? Because nobody's firing a coach on May 1st because all the good coaches have jobs. So basically he was guaranteed 4 years. Well, there was a clause in there. If he made the NCAA tournament in any of those 3 years, that firing date got pushed back. So he makes the NCAA tournament in year 1 with the Porters and Jeremiah Tillman and all that. So that date got pushed back to May 1st, 2021. Then there's another clause in there that says if he makes the NCAA tournament in any subsequent year or wins 20 games, the firing date gets pushed back another year. So he made the NCAA tournament last year. That pushed that date back to May 1st, 2022. So legitimately by contract, the earliest Missouri could get rid of him is May 1st. And they're not it would cost them $6 million at that point. And now look, Cuonzo has not done, he doesn't deserve to get fired. We know what fans are. Every time you lose a game, you do. But he took over one of the 3 worst Power 5 programs in the country, and they've been to 2 tournaments in 5 years. Or 4 years, I'm sorry. So he's done a fine job. The problem is the recruiting's been bad and nobody really sees another level. And it's what I said when it became very clear very early he was Missouri's top target. And I told Missouri fans back then, I said, here's the problem. Here's what Cuonzo's going to do. He's not going to bottom out. You're never going to be terrible. You're also never going to be great. Every single year, you're going to be between 16 and 24 wins. You're going to be just on the right side of the bubble or just on the wrong side of the bubble. And you're probably never really going to have a team that's a threat to do much once they get there. This is his 15th year as a head coach. He's won 3 NCAA tournament games, and they were all in the same year. So, like, he can get you there, but that's about it.
Yeah, this is exactly what I heard from Tennessee fans for how many ever years it was he was there. Yeah. People don't care about a low floor; they care about a ceiling, and that's his issue. So, speaking of baseball, what's the statute of limitations on celebrating a world title? How many years do you get? I think it's at least 7, isn't it?
I still like the Instagram post that says on this day 6 years ago, Alex Gordon homered in Game 1 of the 2015 World Series. So you've got till at least 2026.
Yeah, I think I'll take all of that. I may not get one of those again.
Yeah. It's one of those things. It's like the line from The Office, at the end when Andy Bernard says, "Why didn't anybody tell you about it's the good old days before, when you're in the good old days?" It was like when the Royals were in that run, I was like, okay, I knew it was. I was like, this isn't going to happen again anytime soon. Let's enjoy this.
Yeah, it's like this little depressing edge that goes with it, isn't it? The realization that wherever it goes, it's never going to get better than it is today.
Right, except the flip side is, like, I have a couple of friends who are big Mets fans who, obviously they got there in 2015 too, and at least my team took advantage of being there, right?
Yeah.
Theirs was there and hadn't been back either.
Something you'll never forget.
Yeah, no question. I was a Braves fan this year, no questions.
Yeah, I think, boy, what a few weeks that was.
Yeah.
Gabe, I've kept you a while today. Thank you so much for joining us. It's always interesting when you're on. Tell folks about Power Mizzou and what you guys have got coming up.
Yeah, it's the rival site, obviously, that covers Missouri every single day of the year. We are slogging through basketball season. We're already 10% of the way through. So, only 3 more months till people convince themselves next year is Missouri's year in football, and then we'll go through that cycle again. But Eli Drinkwitz actually is recruiting at a level that Missouri never has, and so I think we'll have a couple interesting years in football coming up here, and I hope we do. And hey, if nothing else, just come over and insult Texas. You'll be very popular.
Are you suggesting that beat writers might count down the days till the end of a season?
No, I am suggesting, and I'm not talking out of school here because I've made this joke on our message board, that the life cycle of a Missouri fan is spending the entire football preseason convincing yourselves that this is the year, and then in about week 6 going, okay, it's cool though, basketball starts soon. And then basketball starts in about week 5, you're like, okay, football starts again soon. Next year, that's our year, baby. And it just kind of goes on and on. You just flip back and forth to, well, maybe the next one will be good at.
Yeah, I hear some places you can cut that down a little shorter, maybe to like a week or 2. But
right.
I'm told. Yeah. But anyway. All right, Gabe, thanks for joining us. We will find a reason to do this again during basketball season or if there's a bowl game or whatever. But it's always a lot of fun, and thank you for joining us.
All right, Chris. Have a good one, man.
All right, he's Gabe DeArmond of PowerMizzou.com. I'm Chris Lee, the host of the 14 podcast. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again next week.